The storm began just after sunset. Dark clouds swallowed the sky above the Whitmore estate, and thunder rattled the towering windows of the mansion like a warning. Inside, the golden chandeliers glowed warmly against polished marble floors, casting soft reflections that made everything appear elegant and untouched. But the warmth in that house was an illusion. I stood in the center of the grand foyer, my hands trembling as I rested one protectively over my swollen belly. At 20, 3 years old and 8 months pregnant with twins, I had never felt more alone. Across from me stood my parents. My mother, Vivian Whitmore, looked flawless as always, dressed in a cream silk gown that probably cost more than most people earned in a year. Her sharp blue eyes, so much like mine, held no trace of compassion. Beside her, my father, Richard Whitmore, stood stiff and imposing in his tailored black suit. His expression was colder than the storm outside. The silence stretched painfully between us. Then my mother spoke. "You've humiliated this family for the last time." Her words struck like ice. I swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "Mom, please, don't call me that," she snapped. The cruelty in her voice made my chest tighten. I had spent my entire life trying to make them proud. Straight A's, debate championships, graduating top of my class in software engineering. I followed every rule they set, attended every event they demanded, smiled for every photo they arranged. And still, none of it mattered. Not now, not after Daniel died. Daniel Carter had been everything my parents never expected me to choose. He wasn't from old money. He wasn't the son of some powerful business associate. He was kind, real. He loved me for who I was, not for my family name. 3 months ago, he had died in a car accident on his way to tell his parents about our engagement. He never got to know I was carrying his children. And when I finally gathered the courage to tell my parents about the pregnancy, they looked at me as if I were filth. My father's jaw tightened. "You've become an embarrassment," he said coldly. "They're your grandchildren." I whispered, my voice shaking. My mother laughed bitterly. "No, they're evidence of your recklessness." The words sliced through me. I stared at her in disbelief. This was the woman who used to tuck me into bed when I was little. The woman who once kissed my scraped knees and told me everything would be okay. What had happened to her? Or had she always been this way? And I had simply been too blind to see it. "I have nowhere else to go," I said softly. For a moment, I thought I saw hesitation in my father's eyes. But then he reached down and tossed a small duffel bag onto the floor at my feet. It landed with a dull thud. Inside were a few clothes and the old laptop I'd used in college. Nothing else. No money, no support. "No apology. You should have thought about that before making disgraceful choices," he said, my breath caught. A sharp pain twisted through my stomach. I gasped and instinctively clutched my belly. Another pain hit seconds later, stronger than the first. My water broke, soaking the marble floor beneath me. For one brief second, panic flashed across my mother's face. But it disappeared just as quickly. "Not here," she said sharply. I stared at her, horrified. "Please," I begged. "I'm in labor." My father walked to the front doors and pulled them open. Rain and wind howled into the foyer. "Get out." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Dad, now." The command in his voice was absolute. I looked desperately between them, praying one of them would stop this. Neither moved, neither cared. Another contraction tore through me. Crying, I grabbed the duffel bag and stumbled toward the open doors. The instant I stepped outside, icy rain drenched me. Behind me, the doors slammed shut. The sound echoed like a final sentence. I was no longer their daughter. The storm blurred everything. Streetlights glowed dimly through sheets of rain as I staggered down empty sidewalks, each contraction stealing more of my strength. I had nowhere to go, No friends close enough to reach, no family willing to help. My body shook violently, whether from cold or fear I couldn't tell. Then I saw it, a faded sign glowing weakly through the darkness. Martha's Community Clinic. It sat on the corner of an aging brick building. Using the last of my strength, I climbed the steps and pounded on the door. Then everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on a narrow bed in a small but warm room. The scent of lavender and antiseptic filled the air. A woman with silver hair leaned over me, her face lined with concern. "Well, hello there," she said gently. "Where? You're safe," she said. "I'm Martha." Another contraction ripped through me, her expression sharpened instantly. "The babies are coming." For the next 14 hours, Martha stayed by my side. She held my hand through every scream, wiped my tears, whispered encouragement when I thought I couldn't go on. And just before dawn, my twins were born. First came my son, then my daughter. Their cries filled the tiny room like music. Martha carefully placed them in my arms. The moment I looked into their tiny faces, the pain, fear, and heartbreak melted into something else. Love, pure and overwhelming. Tears streamed down my cheeks as Leo curled his tiny fingers around mine. Beside him, Lily blinked up at me with sleepy blue eyes. "They were perfect. They're beautiful," Martha whispered. I nodded, unable to speak. As I held them close, I made a silent promise. My parents had abandoned us. They had cast us aside as though we were nothing. But these children would never know that kind of pain. I would fight for them, work for them, sacrifice everything for them. And one day, somehow, I would build a life so strong, so successful, that the people who discarded us would have no choice but to watch. Watch what they threw away and regret it for the rest of their lives. The first year after Leo and Lily were born nearly broke me. There were nights when exhaustion wrapped around me like chains, so heavy I could barely move. Our tiny apartment above Martha's clinic was barely large enough for the three of us. The old heater rattled constantly, and during winter, cold drafts slipped through the cracked window panes no matter how many blankets I stuffed against them. Still, it was home, and it was more kindness than my parents had ever shown me. Every morning began before sunrise. Leo usually cried first, his tiny wails piercing the darkness, followed moments later by Lily's softer cries. I'd pull myself from the narrow couch where I slept, lift them both into my arms, and rock them gently while humming lullabies I barely remembered from my own childhood. Then the day would begin. I waitressed at a 24-hour diner during the mornings, balancing trays of coffee and pancakes while forcing polite smiles for customers who often barely noticed me. At night, after Martha watched the twins, I cleaned office buildings downtown until nearly midnight. By the time I returned home, my feet would ache so badly it felt like walking on broken glass. But every night, after feeding and settling the twins, I opened my old college laptop. That laptop was one of the few things my father had allowed me to keep when he threw me out. At the time, I thought it was because it meant nothing to him. Later, I realized it was the greatest gift he could have unknowingly given me. I spent hours teaching myself advanced coding through free online courses. At first, my eyes would blur with exhaustion. Sometimes my fingers slipped across the keyboard because I was half-asleep. But I kept going because an idea had taken root in my mind. The night I'd gone into labor, I had nowhere to turn. No emergency support, no safe place. If Martha hadn't found me, I didn't know what would have happened. I couldn't stop thinking about how many women faced that same fear every day. So I started building something, a digital platform called SafeNest. It would connect struggling single parents with local shelters, food banks, childcare services, emergency medical support, and job opportunities all through one app. Simple, accessible, life-saving. For months, SafeNest existed only as lines of unfinished code and sleepless determination. Then one evening, as Leo and Lily played on the floor beside me with mismatched plastic toys Martha had collected from yard sales, I finished the first working version. My hands shook as I stared at the screen. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. Mama did it. I whispered. Leo clapped his tiny hands, Lily giggled, and for the first time in years, hope felt real. Launching the app was another battle entirely. I had no investors, no business connections, no marketing budget, just a battered laptop and a belief that SafeNest mattered. I emailed local nonprofits, shelters, and community organizations one by one, asking them to partner with the platform. Most ignored me, some politely declined, a few didn't even bother responding. Then one morning, I got an email from Harper Innovations, one of the city's largest tech incubators. Their director, Elena had seen my pitch. She wanted a meeting. I almost deleted the email, convinced it was a mistake. Instead, I borrowed one of Martha's blazers and took 2 buses downtown to Harper's Glass, covered headquarters. I still remember sitting in that sleek conference room, painfully aware of my scuffed shoes and trembling hands. Across from me sat Elena, a woman known for transforming small ideas into multi-million-dollar companies. She studied me silently for several moments. Then she asked, "Why this app?" I thought about lying, about giving some polished corporate answer. Instead, I told her the truth. I told her about the storm, about my parents, about collapsing outside Martha's clinic while in labor, about the fear of knowing no one was coming to save me. When I finished, the room was silent. Elena leaned back in her chair. Then she smiled. "This isn't just an app," she said. "It's a mission." 3 weeks later, Harper Innovations offered me seed funding. It wasn't millions, but it was enough to hire a small development team, enough to improve the platform, enough to launch SafeNest citywide. The app spread faster than anyone expected. Within 6 months, thousands of parents were using it. Shelters reported dramatic increases in successful placements. Food banks connected with families in hours instead of days. Single mothers sent messages thanking us for helping them find emergency childcare, housing, and legal aid. Then national media noticed. Articles called SafeNest the most compassionate tech breakthrough of the decade. Downloads exploded. Investors flooded in. By the 2nd year, SafeNest expanded nationwide. By the 3rd, internationally. And by the 5th year, my company was valued at over $100 million. The girl my parents had abandoned was suddenly one of the youngest self-made tech CEOs in the country. The greatest reward, though, wasn't the money. It was Leo and Lily. At 8 years old, they were bright, kind, and endlessly curious. Leo loved science and spent hours building little robots from spare electronics. Lily adored books and could lose herself for hours writing stories. They were everything my parents had claimed they would never be. Not burdens, not mistakes, miracles. One Saturday morning, as we ate pancakes in our beautiful penthouse kitchen overlooking the city, Leo looked up from his plate. "Mama, yes, sweetheart, were Grandpa and Grandma ever nice?" The question hit me harder than I expected. I looked at my children, the 2 souls who had given my life purpose, and I chose honesty. Sometimes people care more about appearances than love, I said gently. Lily frowned. "That's sad." "It is." Leo smiled and reached for my hand. "It's okay, we have Martha." I laughed softly. He was right, we had Martha. We had each other, and we had built something stronger than the family I'd lost. What I didn't know was that across town, my parents had just lost everything. Bad investments, failed business deals, crushing debt. The Whitmore empire was collapsing, and soon they would come looking for the daughter they once threw into the storm. This time, though, I would be the one deciding who stayed outside. The invitation arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning. It was hand-delivered in a cream-colored envelope embossed with gold lettering, the kind of expensive stationery my parents had once used for private galas and elite charity functions. I turned it over slowly in my hands as I stood in my office overlooking downtown Manhattan. The return address made my stomach tighten. The Beaumont Grand Hotel, the city's most exclusive venue, home to the annual Legacy of Hope charity gala, an event attended by billionaires, politicians, and the most powerful names in business. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a formal invitation requesting my presence as the evening's mystery keynote benefactor. At the bottom was a handwritten note. Elena insists this year's announcement will change lives. Trust me. Victoria Beaumont. A smile tugged at my lips. Victoria Beaumont, owner of the hotel and one of SafeNest's largest private supporters, had become a close friend over the years. If she was involved, something significant was planned. Still, I had no idea just how life-changing this night would become. That same afternoon, Eleanor Hayes called. "Have you read the invitation?" she asked. "I have," I replied, settling into my chair. "Good. I've kept this under wraps for months, but the board approved it yesterday." "Approved what?" She paused, clearly enjoying the suspense. The international SafeNest expansion generated far more revenue than projected. After all operational allocations, we have an unrestricted discretionary fund. My brows furrowed. How much? Just over $100 million. I nearly dropped the phone. Even after years of success, hearing numbers like that still felt surreal. "What are you telling me? That it's yours to allocate?" I stared out at the skyline, speechless. $100 million? The amount could transform thousands of lives. "What would you do?" Eleanor asked. I didn't hesitate. "I'd give it away." She laughed softly. "That's exactly why I backed you. The gala would be the perfect place to announce it. A public donation. $100 million directed toward building shelters, educational programs, and emergency housing for single parents and vulnerable children worldwide. It would become the largest charitable contribution in the organization's history, and completely unexpected. I agreed immediately. What I didn't know was that news of the mystery donor had already spread through the city's elite circles. And my parents had heard every rumor. The Whitmore estate was gone, sold 6 months earlier to cover mounting debt. Their luxury cars had been repossessed, the private club memberships canceled. Years of reckless investments and my father's arrogance had shattered everything they once built. Now they lived in a rented condominium across town, clinging desperately to the scraps of their former status. When reports surfaced that I was the likely mystery benefactor at the Legacy Gala, desperation sparked into opportunity. For the first time in nearly a decade, they reached out. The call came 2 days before the event. I stared at the unknown number flashing on my phone. Something told me exactly who it was. I answered, "Elena," my mother's voice smooth, controlled, as if no years had passed. As if she hadn't thrown her pregnant daughter into a thunderstorm. I said nothing. Her practiced sweetness cracked slightly. "We've missed you." The lie was almost laughable. "What do you want?" A pause, then my father spoke. "We've heard about your incredible success." Of course they had. "We'd like to reconnect," he said carefully. I leaned back in my chair, stunned by his audacity. Reconnect. as though abandoning me and my unborn children had been some minor misunderstanding. "You made your choice 9 years ago," I said coldly. "Elena," my mother cut in, her voice sharpening. "Families forgive." I almost laughed. "Families don't leave their daughters in labor on the street. Families don't erase blood because it threatens their reputation." "You're right," I said quietly. "Good," she replied quickly, relief flooding her voice. "I'll see you at the gala then." Before I could respond, she hung up. I stared at the dead line. For a moment, anger flared hot and sharp. Then it faded, replaced by calm. They thought this gala was their chance. They thought I would rescue them. They had no idea what was coming. The night of the Legacy of Hope Gala arrived in a blaze of camera flashes and glittering chandeliers. The Beaumont Grand shimmered like a palace, its marble entrance lined with reporters and luxury cars. Inside, the ballroom glowed beneath crystal light. I entered wearing a midnight blue gown, elegant but understated. At my side walked Leo and Lily, now 9 years old, dressed beautifully and carrying themselves with quiet confidence. Martha followed just behind us, radiant in silver. The moment we entered, the room fell silent. Whispers rippled through the crowd. That was something I'd never fully gotten used to, the way people stared, not with pity anymore, with admiration. Across the ballroom, I spotted them, my parents. My mother wore a borrowed designer dress, though I recognized the desperation beneath her polished appearance. My father's tuxedo hung awkwardly on his thinner frame. The years had not been kind. The moment they saw me, their expressions transformed into eager smiles. Predatory smiles. My mother crossed the room first. "Elena," she exclaimed, arms outstretched. I stepped back before she could touch me. The hurt flickering across her face was almost convincing. Then her eyes landed on Leo and Lily, her grandchildren. Children she had once rejected before they were even born. "Oh," she breathed dramatically. "They're beautiful." Lily instinctively moved closer to me. Leo's hand tightened around mine. "Good instincts." My father forced a smile. "We're so proud of what you've accomplished." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Before I could respond, the ballroom lights dimmed. A spotlight illuminated the stage. Victoria Beaumont stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "tonight we witness history." Applause filled the room. She smiled toward me. Our mystery benefactor built an empire from compassion, resilience, and impossible odds. I rose slowly. The room erupted into murmurs. My parents stared in stunned anticipation. I could almost see their thoughts. This was it, the moment I would forgive them, the moment I would save them. I walked to the stage, taking the microphone as thousands of eyes fixed on me. And then I looked directly at my parents. For the first time in years, they truly saw me, not as the daughter they discarded, but as the woman they could never control again. And as I prepared to speak, I knew this would be the night they learned exactly what abandoning me had cost them. The ballroom was silent. Hundreds of eyes followed me as I stood beneath the spotlight, the microphone steady in my hand. Across the room, my parents sat frozen at their table near the front. My mother's face glowed with anticipation, her lips already curling into the triumphant smile of someone certain she had won. My father sat straighter in his chair, adjusting his cufflinks as though he belonged among the city's elite. They truly believed this moment was for them. They thought I had invited them here to offer forgiveness, to restore what they had lost, to hand them the lifeline they were too proud to ask for directly. They were wrong. I glanced toward Leo and Lily. My twins sat beside Martha at our table, their small faces lifted toward me. Leo gave me an encouraging nod. Lily smiled softly, her bright blue eyes full of trust. The sight of them grounded me. Everything I had built, every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every success, it had all begun with them. Taking a slow breath, I faced the crowd. When I was 23 years old, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the ballroom. I stood in the middle of a storm with nowhere to go. The room fell even quieter. I could feel my parents' expressions stiffen. I was 8 months pregnant with twins. I continued. The father of my children had just died in a car accident. I was grieving, terrified, and desperate for support. I paused. And that was the night my parents threw me out of their home. A ripple of shocked murmurs swept through the audience. My mother's smile vanished instantly. My father's face drained of color. I looked directly at them. They called my children a disgrace, a mistake, an embarrassment. Gasps echoed across the room. My mother shifted uncomfortably, forcing a weak smile as if trying to dismiss my words as exaggeration. But no one was smiling now. I went into labor that night. I said, in the rain, alone, homeless. I tightened my grip on the microphone. If not for a woman named Martha, who found me collapsed outside her tiny community clinic, my children and I might not be here today. A spotlight shifted briefly toward Martha. The audience turned and erupted into applause. Tears filled her eyes as she pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. She gave me shelter when I had none, I said. She believed in me when the people who should have loved me most abandoned me. The applause grew louder. My parents sat rigidly, shrinking under the weight of public judgment. I let the silence settle before continuing. For years, I struggled to survive. I worked endless shifts. I raised my twins in a one-bedroom apartment, and every night, after they fell asleep, I taught myself to build something that could help other mothers facing the same fear I once did. The giant screen behind me lit up with the SafeNest logo. The room erupted into cheers. That platform became SafeNest, not because I had wealth, not because I had connections, but because I had purpose. I looked once more at my parents. The people who abandoned me taught me something important. The room held its breath. They taught me exactly who I never wanted to become. The words landed like thunder. My mother's face crumpled. My father stared at me with something I had never seen in his eyes before. Regret, real, devastating regret. Then came the moment they had been waiting for. I smiled. Tonight, I stand before you as the sole director of SafeNest's Global Expansion Fund. The crowd leaned forward. Behind my parents' eyes, hope reignited. They thought this was the turn, the part where I softened, where family ties overcame everything. I let them believe it for one final second. Then I spoke. I am donating the full $100 million. Thunderous applause exploded through the ballroom. But I wasn't finished. The funds will establish emergency housing centers, legal aid programs, and educational scholarships for abandoned mothers and vulnerable children in 23 countries. The giant screen behind me lit up with project renderings. SafeNest shelters, schools, community clinics. Entire futures being built. The applause became deafening. My mother's face twisted in disbelief. My father shot to his feet. "Elena," he shouted. The room fell silent again. Security immediately moved toward him. His face was pale with desperation. That money, he stopped himself too late. The entire room understood exactly what he had meant. That money should have been theirs. The shame that washed over his features was immediate. My mother stood next, tears streaming down her cheeks. "We're your family," she pleaded. The words echoed painfully through the ballroom. For a brief moment, memories flashed through my mind. Childhood birthdays, school recitals, moments when I had once believed their love was real. Then I remembered the storm, the rain, the slammed door, and the tiny cries of my newborn twins. I stepped closer to the edge of the stage. "No," I said calmly. My voice was soft, but it carried through every corner of the room. "Family doesn't abandon you when you need them most." The words hit like a final verdict. My parents collapsed back into their chairs, broken and exposed. The audience remained silent for several heartbeats. Then the applause began. It started slowly, then swelled and swelled until the entire ballroom was standing, cheering not for my success, but for what it meant, for every mother who had ever been discarded, for every child who had ever been told they were unwanted. I stepped down from the stage and returned to my table. Leo threw his arms around me first. "You were amazing, Mama." Lily hugged me tightly. "I'm proud of you." Martha wiped tears from her cheeks as she embraced all three of us. Over their shoulders, I glanced one last time toward my parents. They sat alone in the middle of a room full of people, yet utterly invisible. No power, no status, no control. Only regret. And as I turned away from them forever, I realized the sweetest revenge had never been making them suffer. It was building a life so full of love, purpose, and success that their rejection no longer mattered. They had abandoned me and my twins, and in doing so, they had given me the greatest gift of all, the chance to prove we never needed them to rise.